I'm just so thrilled to be able to have three amazing guests with me. I'm going to do a quick little intro for each of them, and then we'll get into the conversation. So Chris here has been an incredible leader in the community solar space, led SolarShare. You were the executive director of SolarShare for about 10 years, but we do have a special announcement because you are no longer the executive director at SolarShare. You're kind of going to be speaking about your experiences there tonight, but you're now at TAF, Toronto Atmospheric, or the Atmospheric Fund. Is that right?
Absolutely right. I'm really excited to join TAF just last week, so I'm right out of the frying pan into the fire, and I have a lot of exciting things to do at TAF. But tonight I'll be wearing my SolarShare hat.
Absolutely, and really happy to lean on your experience there. Jane Bird is an old dear friend from King's College. We went to undergrad together back in the day, and then we've sort of reconnected here in Toronto over the years, running in very similar sustainability circles. You're now the VP of Sustainability at Brookfield Renewable Energy Partners, which is an incredible organization, one of the largest renewable energy developers, certainly in Canada. It's the largest and one of the biggest in the world. But I know you're so passionate about community renewable energy projects that in our conversations together, this has been a real focus for you. So I'm so happy to have you here tonight. Thank you so much. Amazing. And Bernard Tan from RE Royalties. Bernard, we connected. It was 5 years ago. When COVID hit, I figured out how to live stream. People were kind of freaking out about the markets, and so I decided to learn how to start live streaming on YouTube, and was kind of started my first iteration of this show. And Bernard, you had your first green bond 5 years ago. That's where we first connected. It's now been 5 years since, and you've now repaid that initial green bond. Is that right?
That's right.
And so RE Royalties is a renewable energy financing company. They trade on the TSX Venture Exchange. So an incredible company there. So really what we have here is a broad spectrum of folks who are involved in the community power space. From SolarShare, which is a nonprofit renewable energy cooperative, all the way up to Brookfield Renewable Partners, which is, one of the largest players in this space, right? RE Royalties, which is doing some incredible work financing renewable energy projects. We're all here because right now is a really awkward time for us climate change advocates, people who really give a damn about this issue. I think we're all feeling a little bit upset looking at the global situation right now, that the COP meeting just ended with very little for us to cheer about. Closer to home, we just had a federal budget that was announced with very little for us to cheer about. And so my perspective on this is that really a recognition that the people at the top, the people with the most political power in the world right now, are not coming to save us. We cannot rely on them. That instead, where the change is happening right now is at the grassroots level. It's with community solar projects. It's with community investment. That it's regular people putting together, carving out a small little slice of your portfolio. The people here in the audience, the people listening on Zoom, we're the ones who are going to be leading this change. So my hope tonight is to have some great conversations to set the stage about community solar and the exciting things that are happening, and then really to encourage you and to empower you to consider carving out that little small slice of your portfolio to make a difference. Now, will say that I'll disclose a small little conflict, which is that I'm an investor in all three of these organizations. I've been a SolarShare member for I don't know how many years now, but I bought my solar bond, quite a while ago through the fine folks at Tapestry. Brookfield is one of the top holdings in one of my ETFs, one of my Doing More Good ETFs, QCLN. So I hold it indirectly through an ETF. And I am a direct shareholder in RE Royalties. I own my shares. Bernard, I got my little proxy circular for the AGM in the mail that I do own shares directly. So that is sort of my, conflict here, disclosing that I've got some skin in the game. I know a thing or two about each of these organizations, and I'm just so happy to be able to shine a spotlight. So to get started, really what I want to do is Jane, I'll start with you. I'll give everyone sort of the opportunity here to be able to comment on this. But really, I want to understand, why solar specifically and why now? That now it does seem like there is a little bit of a moment for solar energy, despite everything that's happening in the world. Solar energy is definitely having a moment right now. So I'll hand it to you to give your thoughts on just kind of, big picture, why solar and why now?
Thank you very much, Tim, and thank you for having me. I'm really excited.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry. I'm very excited. That was too close. Okay. I think for us, and I'll take the Brookfield hat first. For us, we continue to see solar and renewables not only as kind of the clean option, but also the most economical. So right now, solar in particular is the lowest cost form of bulk electricity that exists. It is also the fastest to market. So to put into perspective, since 2010, the levelized cost of energy coming from solar has reduced by 90%. That's incredible in terms of what you are able to produce in that time. The other piece that's really important to note is that you can build solar, especially if you have on-site solar, within 6 months. At the furthest end of how long it takes you to build solar would be about 2 years, and that's with permitting, with supply chain, et cetera. If you compare that to, say, thermal energy, the minimum time right now to build a new thermal plant, especially natural gas, is 5 years. And that's only in the time that it will take you to order your turbine. That's not talking about needing to build out the pipes, needing to get the permits, needing the interconnection, and everything else. So right now, despite the noise, despite what you might be hearing, south of the border in particular, around incentives, it is still the most economical, fastest to market option to support the growing demand for electricity. So just from a pure business perspective, solar has its moment now for sure. I think the other piece, to talk about is obviously it's still a green option, and that we've seen increase over time. So we've seen the kind of life cycle emissions of solar panels reduce significantly in the last few years. They're being built faster with less material, which means they're more efficient when they go on the grid, they last longer, but there's also significant reductions in things like polysilica that's going in that do have a footprint on their own. There's also a lot being done with how they're being transported, how they're being packaged, and what we can do to recycle them at the end of life. So on top of the fact that economically they're the best option, they're also kind of the greenest option that we're seeing across the market. So I would say those two elements and the ability to just build them anywhere and everywhere are crucial. I think the one thing that I would add is, we have seen solar surge, pun intended, I guess, over the last few years.
We'll lean into the puns tonight.
But one thing that we've noted as well is that in some markets they've become oversaturated. So it's really important when you're looking at solar as a solution to think about storage as well. And so what we're seeing is not only that solar is an option, but how do you couple that with things like battery storage, which by a chance has also come down about 50% in cost or more. And they're also getting more efficient and longer term, et cetera. So I think the combination of batteries and solars is really a winning grid stabilizing energy source for any community, anywhere, because it is so accessible. So I think someone recently said it's like life-size Lego. So it is that easy to kind of plan and do moving forward. So that's
great. No, and I think that's a really good place to start, is that understanding that it is about the economics, right? And I often talk about this notion of the unstoppable green economy, that policy can speed it up or slow it down. No doubt our political leaders, have that power. We can do that. But the technology, the price reductions, the cost of solar coming down, the price of batteries coming down. Bernard, I want to get your feel in terms of the sort of the economics of some of these projects. Like, I don't know if there's an IRR, internal rate of return, that you're sort of looking for from these projects. But, would really love to hear from you sort of, why solar and why now?
Yeah, no, thanks for that. And, I think definitely everything that Jane mentioned about, we are definitely seeing in our clients and our portfolios as well. I love examples, so I'm going to give an example of an actual transaction that we did. So we actually finance a Canadian company that is working in the Maldives. So the Maldives is an island community, sort of in the Indian Ocean. Doesn't have a lot of land and doesn't really have any incentives either. But yet, this company that we help finance, had the investment case of making solar work. So they installed panels on top of the local hospital, the resorts. The Maldives have a lot of resorts, and they were able to cut costs roughly by about a third. And this is without batteries. Now, if you add batteries, they still utilize diesel generation, but just purely looking at the diesel cost, the transportation costs, the carbon footprint, it made a ton of sense, and it's very economical. So that's just one example. We have clients in Mexico with same profile, even here in Canada where the irradiation is much less, that economic case can still be made. The one thing I want to add to what Jane mentioned was also with respect to putting solar, it's also very scalable. So it's not, when you think fields and fields of solar panel, what we're talking about with some of our clients, it's just on the rooftops. And, back in the Feed and Tariff program here in Ontario, you can see when you're flying over, you can see lots of panels on industrial rooftops. So that's the one nice thing about solar is that you can scale, and you can scale based on the footprint that you have. And really, a lot of times you're not completely eliminating traditional fuels, but you are reducing it as well. So that's really one of the key benefits of having efficient solar, I guess.
Absolutely. And I think when it comes to the efficiency, it is so important to understand that, it is scalable. And the other thing is that we can build it so quickly, right? I'm hearing a lot of talk right now about nuclear. I'm not in a position, I don't want to be slagging other technologies at all. I very much believe in sort of an all of the above approach. That said, how long does it take to build a nuclear plant? Right. And then from a financing perspective, we now have to finance that. They're going to finance it with debt for the most part. You're paying interest for 5 years, 10 years, even natural gas, you're paying interest for all of those years until the project is online. Whereas with these solar projects, you can start small, you can scale it up. It is kind of like Lego, you can add things on. As the technology improves, we can, play around with it in that way. But to me, it's the speed of deployment is to me just absolutely fantastic. Chris, you've been doing this now, 10 years. 10 years ago, when we were building the community solar projects here in Ontario, we needed the feed and tariff program. The economics weren't the same that they are now. Would really love to hear from you. What has changed? What do you see? What is the big differences now versus 10 years ago?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think what Jane and Bernard and you have just said is all absolutely true. The speed with which solar can be deployed. I remember being at a conference probably 15 years ago where someone stood up and said, we don't have any, it was probably 20 years ago, 20 years ago now, I'm a little older. And the person stood up and said, look, we don't have any engineers, we don't have any lawyers, we don't have any, people who know how to install this stuff, how to operate it. And now through things like the FIT program, through industrial policy like that, we've really turned that corner. And so it has become the fastest to deploy, the cheap, like the ISO, even the ISO says it's the cheapest new form of generation. The beautiful thing about solar, I think, is that you can put it anywhere. Anyone can generate it. I love that. I think that's a beautiful thing. And so, the changes that have happened because it's come down so fast in price, because we've learned about how to do this a lot better, we can deploy it without those kinds of subsidies. And I think that's really amazing. We can do it very quickly. We're going to be growing our electricity load in the province by 75% over the next 15 years, and that's or 25 years. So we're going to really have to deploy a lot of capital and effort to meet that demand, and better if we can meet it with low emitting. The other thing I want to say about solar is that, it doesn't put anything into the atmosphere, and like, notwithstanding the manufacturing and everything, the beautiful thing about solar panels is that they're basically inert. You take them off and we can recycle them. We know how to do that. That hasn't really happened to the extent that we want to yet, but once you put that stuff into the atmosphere, it's very difficult to get it out, and much better not to do that in the first place.
Yeah, if we can, because we got a question in the chat, and I think I know what you're going to speak to, which is the environmental impact. That there is a lot of misinformation about this right now. The question says, some say battery technology is harmful to the environment at the end of life and usefulness. Can someone comment? I didn't want to jump in there if you've got something else to say before addressing that.
Well, maybe this addresses both of them, but what I was going to say was just the point about where you can put it is really important. What we've looked at is land is a big issue. I mean, maybe not in Canada, but it is in a lot of places in the world, and how we're using it. The great thing about solar is you can put it on contaminated land. So brownfield solar is really growing, but the other is, how do we look at solar and agriculture together? So, there's a lot around like shade farming. There's a lot of agricultural land. It's hugely beneficial for solar to have kind of agrovoltaics from many reasons: soil, the soil quality, the ability for those plants to last longer. So we're seeing now not only the benefits in terms of the climate perspective, but from a biodiversity, from a land management perspective, there's a lot of additional benefits. Batteries similarly can go on to land that can't be used for other things. Batteries are also something that can be used as a replacement for peaker plants. So where you can use those interconnections, it can be really, really beneficial. From a mining perspective, yes, batteries do have a footprint that is considerable. And I think that it's hard to look at any of these technologies without looking at the fact that we do rely seriously on critical minerals for it. But I think there's been a lot of work and push, mostly, I would say, driven by Europe, around how we can look at the types of recycled material that goes into it. Recognizing that we still do need some of those minerals, how can we start to look at minimizing the kind of new mined material and reutilizing it? And I think the recycling of batteries has come a long way as well. It's probably the most recyclable of any of the renewable kind of technologies, would be batteries. But yes, there's always some risk to it. But I think in the balance of it, if you look at what you're able to do, both from atmosphere perspective, a land utilization perspective, and bringing down the use of fossil fuels, I think on balance, it still comes up front.
Absolutely. And, I'm a huge fan of energy efficiency. I often say that sort of the cheapest megawatt is a negawatt, right? Like, if we can not use a unit of electricity, that's always going to be better than producing an extra unit. That said, we're in a place right now where energy consumption is going up. Data centers, I think everyone's talking about this right now. We're starting to imagine this sort of next evolution of our economy in terms of AI as a productivity tool. If we're going to have self-driving cars, and we're going to have all these things, the amount of energy that it's going to take is massive. And so if we are going to have increased energy use, we can't do that from fossil fuels. From both a supply perspective, like they are non-renewable, will run out eventually, but then also from a waste perspective, right? Putting them up into the atmosphere, we're already hitting those boundaries to growth. So if we are going to sort of take that next evolutionary leap as a society into this next economic stage, we need something that is scalable. We need something that will grow. There are negative externalities, I think, for all energy sources. We're not here to dismiss that. At the same time, I think there is a lot of misinformation about these things, where a lot of people will say, oh, well, what about the environmental cost? It's not really green. What about the land use? We shouldn't be using prime agricultural land for this. And I agree with that. There are lots of brownfields. There are lots of roofs. There are lots of great places for us to be able to put these things. What I want to talk a little bit now are some of the positive externalities. Because more than just creating energy, this is about this notion of community energy is what we're focused on. So, Chris, maybe I can kind of lean on you first for this, but this notion of some of the positive impacts of creating these renewable energy projects right where the power is needed, and what are some of the impacts of this community solar piece?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to speak to that. One thing, if I can, I'd like to add on to what you were just saying. In terms of efficiency is wonderful. Engineers love efficiency. And the thing about electricity and electrification is that we're much more efficient when we use energy, when we use electricity. When we run a vehicle from electricity, it's 80% efficient versus like 30% efficient. And heat pumps are 3 times as efficient. So that's really important to understand that as we electrify and as we use renewable resources, we're doing a lot more with less, or the same with less. The other thing is, in terms of the mining, totally agree. We do have issues with the supply chain in mining, and that's not to be overlooked. I guess I'd say too that mining fossil fuels comes with a cost and takes a lot of land. And again, we're putting that into the atmosphere, and I think that's a real critical issue that we have to deal with. So in terms of solar and how it can help drive community. I think one of the things I think about Solar Share, obviously, like I love Solar Share and I love cooperative organizations. And the beautiful thing about cooperative organizations and why solar and co-ops go so well together is that solar can go anywhere. So any community can have solar power, which is amazing. So citizens can take that power into their own hands, literally. And the other thing is that cooperatives are owned and operated and controlled by the members who receive the benefits. And I think because of that, solar is because anyone can put it up, you can do it anywhere, communities can get together, you get buy-in and acceptance and benefit from those kinds of projects in a distributed way to meet the needs of those people in that community who benefit economically, and they can also control those assets. And I think that's one of the most beautiful things about solar, is that it can act as a vehicle for community wealth building and community democratic control. And I think that's one of the reasons I really love solar co-ops and other renewable energy co-ops like Solar Share.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, the notion of community wealth, I think, is something that, really speaks to me, that we do have so much benefit there. It goes beyond just the money that we have, but it is also part of, we have a lot of wealth in our communities. Wealth is power. And again, this is a way for us to be able to use that power, use that wealth, to be able to build the kind of community that we want. We're going to need energy. Let's build it in a more sustainable way. Jane, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Sure. I think the way I looked at it is there's 3 key themes that I see around community. I think the accessibility is a big one as well. The nice localization of solar means that you can have it directly and available to you on your rooftops as part of your community space as well. So I think there's that piece. I think the other is independence. And I think that's really key. It's about not having to be attached to the grid. It's about being able to form energy where you are, being not relying on others necessarily for your energy, but whether that's at your community level, at your building level, at your house level, there's that independence that you can have that comes with security as well. And I think we're seeing more and more the option around some community constructs which also support that affordability. So, it's the wealth, but it's also giving incentive to reduce the cost of energy for communities that need it the most. And there's a lot of models out there that demonstrate how possible that is by introducing community solar into it.
Amazing. Thank you, Bernard.
Yeah, again, just echoing what Chris and Jane talked about. One of the sort of reasons why we see our clients do what they do and really bring on solar is really resiliency. And when I say resiliency, it's a number of different factors. One is really future-proofing their energy supply down the road. So future-proofing as in, if there's a disruption in terms of energy going across the grid, whether, when we've seen in California where the grid needs to be shut down because of wildfires during certain times of the year, or there's overcapacity that we saw in Texas, because there was a winter storm that came through. That's one aspect of it for communities to be able to future-proof and create that resiliency. The other one that Jane highlighted is costs. So again, going back to the example of our client with an island community, the cost of energy to bring that energy to an island, increases over time, and you're competing against data centers, other electrification. So it's a way for communities to really look at it from a resiliency, future-proofing. It's almost like an insurance policy against costs that may impact the community, which then impacts affordability and a whole array of different sort of social and economic factors. So really, I think looking at solar, energy storage, those are kind of factors, for communities to consider on a go forward basis. Yes, there's the negative impacts of, putting how much, what was the sort of cost of mining the materials and so forth. But I think keeping that sort of life cycle focus of what it could be for the next 20, 30 years, I think it's also important to consider.
I love it. And, just picking up on the resiliency piece, because there's a little anecdote. I've been watching a lot of sports lately. Obviously, the Blue Jays, we all got into that. It's football season right now. And I tend to watch some of the US feeds. And there's this commercial that keeps popping up, which to me is the most interesting thing, because it's forpatriots.com is the URL. And it's a battery generator marketed for preppers. Essentially like conservative, like very much like rural conservative preppers who are really worried about, the World Economic Forum. And these are people who, maybe are spreading some of this information about renewable energy. But it's a commercial selling a battery, billing it as a generator that you can have indoors because there are no emissions, so you don't need the diesel and you can have it indoors. It comes with a solar panel and they have it, the whole pitch is about resiliency. And I just can't help but think there's some environmentalist, somewhere just laughing. They've like figured out how to market solar panels and batteries to conservatives by talking about freedom and energy independence and don't rely on the government to meet your power needs. You can do it yourself with your own power. So I do think, as we try to reach out across the aisle to other demographics, I think having this message of independence, security, resilience, I think is just so absolutely critical. A couple little things just from the chat here. That I just want to pick up on. Someone had a question about CDIFs in Nova Scotia. So to my knowledge, this is Community Economic Development Investment Funds. One of my favorite models in all of Canada is in Nova Scotia. To my knowledge, there isn't a solar one. There is wind share, or wind for all rather. Wind for all, I believe, is the Nova Scotia. So happy to have that. Really interesting question about understanding sort of that there are, I struggle with this a little bit because there is a question about sort of federal government and sort of some of the incentives and what they can be doing there. But I got to say, I've spent a lot of time thinking about what governments can be doing on this. And I'm at the point where I'm kind of done. There's a lot they can be doing. Right? There are a lot of people that are pushed there. So, I welcome that and some organizations that are moving it, but I want to stay focused on what we can do. And I think that too many of us have spent a lot of time trying to push governments on these issues. And that I want to focus on what we can do. So, really where I want to bring the conversation now is to the role of what are called retail investors. Now, I use this term retail investors very deliberately. In the investment world, we do differentiate between institutional investors, which is like the big pools of money for the institutions, like the pension funds and the foundations and the high net worth investors, right? Often we call these folks accredited investors, i.e. millionaires, and that's one segment. And then the other segment that I love spending my time with are the retail investors. And that's where I think most of us are, if you're here at this panel, are retail investors. And so really want to focus on the power of retail investors, of regular, everyday folks. And Bernard, I want to start with you because RE Royalties, you know, the ticker symbol is RE.V. I'll just sort of plug that for folks. That the reason you kind of are publicly traded is to be able to access and to create accessibility for these retail investors. So tell me a little bit about, with your company, you know, what is the role of retail investors?
It's extremely important. Really, when we started the company, it was a way to democratize the ability for any investors, you know, including myself, my family, friends, my colleagues, to be able to participate, irrespective of whether, you know, you're an institutional investor or a retail investor. I do want to say that, you know, with respect to institutions, most of the time, institutions are a collective of average retail investors. So when you think about some of the large pension funds, the government-sponsored pension funds, you know, the labor-sponsored funds, those are usually a collection of folks that are here, listening online, on the street. So that's an important consideration. Ultimately, even institutions are just a collection of retail investors, and really that's the voice. I know there's a number of different organizations that really push for, again, decarbonization, and it's important to make your voices known, because really, ultimately, it's, you know, a democratic system. There are ways that obviously government can mobilize incentives, and we've seen that. You know, I think Tim, you mentioned the CEDIP program, but Canada also has a flow-through program, different incentives across different provinces that allow and encourage. You know, unfortunately, it's not always coordinated, and every jurisdiction has a little bit of its own special flavor. But really, you know, it's not, you know, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. And I think that's the key thing for investors to really look at, that when you do put your capital, it's a long term, because the capital is being utilized to help decarbonize. And really, that's the objective of all of us here in this room, and also virtually.
Yeah, and happy to shout out to our good friends at Shift Action, incredible organization. They push pensions, so they helped a number of young folks take legal action against the Canadian pension plan, right, to take climate change into consideration. So we love our friends at Shift Action. But Bernard, I want to stay with you on this, because specifically with your company, like, walk me through, like, when I buy shares of RE Royalties, or when I buy a green bond from RE Royalties, like, that's a way for me to have a real impact. Can you give me like the life of a dollar? Like, when I loan you a dollar, help me understand like what happens to that dollar.
So for RE Royalties, and I guess here's the pitch portion, we took that capital 5 years ago. We invested it into energy storage projects, solar projects in Alberta. We got repaid that capital, and we repaid that capital back to our investors with interest. We have different sort of series of bonds. You know, the ones that we recently repaid was 6%, but the last one that we issued was 9%. So it's, you know, I think the comment that we've gotten, it's an attractive return, and that's really what we try to provide. You know, obviously the economics to make sure that everything hangs and ties together, and we're looking for projects that can support those kind of economics.
And for me, it just really is so nice knowing, like, obviously, if I own my home and I've got a roof and I can put up solar panels on my own roof, that's one thing, right? But not everyone's in that position. I rent. I don't have the opportunity to put up solar panels. So to me, it's about understanding how can I access this, and that you're in a really interesting place in the market, right? Because I do think there is support for a lot of like large projects. That if there's a large, multi-million-dollar project, and Jan, I'm going to get you in a minute because this is Brookfield sort of bread and butter, are these larger projects, right? And then, we've got Chris over here with the local projects, the community-owned nonprofit. But you work with some amazing developers that are just kind of in that middle area. And I just want to understand a little bit why, financing, like you're an accountant by trade, that's your background. You were looking for a way to make a difference, to be able to have an impact. And you landed on this model of renewable energy financing. Like, what is the gap that you're really filling, from a financing perspective?
I guess the easiest way to describe it is complementary capital. So really, it's really the missing piece. What we look for when developers and operators come to us is what is that missing piece in terms of capital that needs to get the project up and running or the continuing operating. So to give you an example, I'll use our client in Nova Scotia. We help them repay debt because they borrowed money. We helped them restructure, and then we actually brought in a credit union to help refi. So it's not necessary, I would call, it is somewhat financial engineering. I know that has a negative connotation, but it's really trying to fix a financial problem. And that's really the purpose of our company, to really not just bring capital, but bring capital that actually fixes a financial problem. Most of the time with most energy projects, as an example, I mentioned the Canadian company that was operating, of all places, the Maldives. Very difficult to finance a Maldivian company from Canada. Most banks can't even point to which ocean the Maldives are. So that's one example, because it's really that outside the box thinking, that creativity, and our client got the project up and running. They're going to be repaying us back soon, and then we can return that capital to bondholders and shareholders. So that's just one example, because my view has always been climate change is global. We need to think globally, because whatever happens on this side of the world happens on the other side of the world as well.
Absolutely. Jane, you've got Brookfield, really large company. I imagine sort of my shares that I own aren't going to have sort of as big of an impact. That said, I think that helped me understand the role of retail investors. Is it worthwhile for us to be pushing those large institutions? Like who's the voice if we want to help Brookfield Renewable do more of the good work that it's doing? How do we do that?
So first, I'll challenge the impact piece, because I mean, in the last 3 years since I've been working at that, we've put about 15 gigawatts of clean energy in the ground. That's net new globally, and that's across jurisdictions all over the world. And we're looking to put about 8 gigawatts per year for the next 5 years on a minimum. And so, I mean, yes, in terms of the community side, no, but in terms of the global impact that we're having on the renewable energy space, I would say, yes, it's definitely there. I think the key piece when you're looking at, and obviously I don't, the goal here isn't to plug everyone investing into Brookfield Renewables, but I think what's important if you are looking into that space and you are looking at the big companies is a couple of things that you should look for in those investments. We've seen a lot of noise in renewable energy. Kind of feels a little bit like it was a trend in coming in some of these companies, and I've worked for other public renewable companies as well. And we see it go up and down, and a lot of volatility in the market. So it's key to look at companies that have a sustainable, and not just in the green perspective, but an actual sustainable business model when they're looking at their renewables. So looking for key markets, looking for the ability to weather the storm of, say, policy over time, and what that actually looks like in the next 5, 10 years. We've seen things like offshore wind, for instance, which is not as sustainable, lots of debt, lots of lead time, versus things that are more heavily weighted on, let's call it solar or batteries or others, that if you are looking, look at those long-term plans of these companies, see what they're doing, see how they're managing the risk of kind of a volatile environment. The other piece I would say is that we actually do have a lot of community solar, not necessarily in Canada, not our biggest market, but in the US and in LATAM and starting in Europe are what we call distributed generation companies, which is essentially on-site solar. Does a lot of community solar in the space. It's a growing area. These are working together in coalitions with local state governments as well as local businesses to help support bringing down the cost for mostly low, medium income residents and families, as well as those small businesses. So there's those opportunities as well. And it's good to kind of know who you're investing in. Certainly, if you have opinions, there's AGMs, there's always the ability to contact the businesses. But I think for those, they are slightly more passive just because of the size. And truthfully, if you can own enough shares to have a big voice in it, like, good for you. You're doing really, really well. But I think something that Bernard said, which I would point to, is that, we have a lot of institutional investors, and you are investors or shareholders in those. Pension funds is a good example of that, where, what you are already giving to has a lot of power for these big companies. So if you want your voice to be heard, it's almost indirectly through those. I mean, CPP is a perfect example, but, others as well that you might have through pensions, through other, is a great opportunity to have your voice heard. I think the other piece, and just kind of stepping away from the public company, is that, a lot of change needs to happen within the infrastructure all around us. So looking at things like public buildings, public utilities, hospitals, these are all opportunities for growth in solar and using renewable energy, and helping bring down your community's overall footprint. And we all have the power to advocate in those spaces as well. So that's another tool. So, the big companies, maybe how you can also gain profit from having investing in it while having an impact, although probably less directly than we have in Bernard's case. But certainly encourage you to do your homework on those businesses. But then again, raising that awareness within the pensions that you may hold, within the investments that you do hold that are invested in these big companies, and making sure that they're doing their diligence with their large investments, and then encouraging kind of your own communities to look at public infrastructure options that when they're going out to bid for their next contracts around energy, what they're choosing.
Amazing. And, Jane, and obviously all of our panelists are going to be, very kind and saying, oh, we don't want to sort of push our company too much kind of thing. But I'm here to push their companies for them. So Brookfield Renewable Partners actually has 2 ticker symbols. There's what is it? BEPC, which is the one that I prefer, a little bit more tax advantaged. There is the other one. Oh, it's -UN. I know. Do you know it?
I don't know, because there's the Canadian, and we're on the US stock exchange as well. So we're BEP there.
BEPC is the one. BEP-UN is the other one. I prefer the BEPC is, if you're looking up a ticker, that's the one. And, there are different ways. Obviously, some people invest directly. The reason I've got you both here and I want to, share people the ticker symbols is because a lot of people I know are sort of DIY investors. These are things that anyone can buy on any investment platform. You can hold them inside of RSPs and TFSAs. As the financial planner, I want to remind you, don't put all of your money into these things. You want to carve out a small little part of your portfolio, maybe even 1%, maybe up to sort of 5% of your portfolio for individual companies, please and thank you. But having that, think about when I do consider the literal trillions of dollars that Canadian investors control, carving out 1% of that would be absolutely massive. And, I had a conversation with someone a couple weeks ago on the podcast, and the reason they got involved in the retail investors was because of the GameStop sort of situation. I almost want to call it debacle, But I don't know if people know about this, but I'll just give a quick little overview, which is that when COVID hit, a lot of people started day trading. And that some online communities kind of blew up with interest in investors. And GameStop is a company that it's like video games. It's a video game retailer. A lot of people had a nostalgic vibe for it. It was getting under attack by Wall Street. There were a lot of short sellers that were going after it. And these people online said, no, hell no, you are not going to pick apart my favorite company. And together they invested a lot in GameStop shares and had a huge impact on it. They showed the power of retail investors, that we have power with our money. And it doesn't feel like it when I'm investing, oh, $1,000 here, $1,000 there. But you got to realize if we can do it as a community, this is what's missing, is that for environmentalists to take the power, to take the wealth that we've got, to use that power collectively, we can absolutely build out renewable energy to scales we can't even imagine if we were to do it together.
I was just going to say, and make money off of it. We have a
And
very
make
strong
money off of
dividend
it.
if anyone's interested in that form of income. But like so far, I would say that's the other piece of it, right? Feel good about it and make money off of it.
This is it. Like, this isn't philanthropy. We are talking about investments. You know, Chris, and I will say for folks online, throw questions in the chat. Folks in the room, make eye contact with me if you've got a question. I'll ask you to say the question, then I'll repeat it in the mic for the digital audience. But that, you know, this is sort of going to be the last piece here before we do, you know, break into the Q&A portion. So if you've got questions, like, now's the time, think about them. You know, we've got some brilliant minds here. What questions do you have for them? Like, Chris, the power of retail investors, like, one of the reasons I love Solar Shares so much is because from the get-go, it had a minimum investment of $1,000. That when I was looking at different projects and different investment opportunities, you know, oh, so many times it was like, you know, $100,000 minimum, $250,000 minimum, $1 million minimum. Like, are you kidding me? With Solar Share from day one, it's been $1,000 a bond. Help me understand the power of those regular everyday folks who are just like investing $1,000 at a time in Solar Share.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. I think so. For those who don't know much about Solar Shares, like Tim said, a nonprofit renewable energy cooperative operating here in Ontario. We were established in 2010, and over that time, we've raised more than $90 million from investors just like yourselves, residents of Ontario, and from about more than 2,000 members who have invested. And I guess, you know, retail, we're very proud of the fact that, you know, we focus on retail investors and that we try and make our investment opportunity accessible. And I think that's something that we want more people to come and be able to invest in Solar Share. And I guess, you know, when I think about community solar, I think, you know, there's community solar and then there's community solar, and we're the latter version of community solar. You know, there's solar that can be in the community, and then there's solar that's owned and operated and for and by the community. And I think that's what we're trying to do. And I think that's a significant distinction. And I think when I think about my colleagues in, like, you know, traditionally businesses, you put in a certain amount of money, and you have that amount of say. If your amount of money is $1,000 on $1 million, well, you don't have very much say. In Solar Share and in cooperatives, you are democratically controlled. It doesn't matter how much money you put in. Every person has the same rights. And I think that's a critical component of control and benefit of these community solar projects. And that's, you know, driving that. And furthermore, we're investing in Ontario for Ontarians. We're not investing in the Maldives, and we're not investing in other places around the world. We're investing in our own backyards. And I think that's a critical distinction. And so what I want to see more of is more locally owned renewable energy projects that go to benefit the people who live in those communities and benefit from that electricity.
That's great. I've got a couple questions from the chat. I just want to survey the audience. Yeah, I'll do one in person here first. So the ticker symbol, the question is the ticker symbol, RE.V. I got that right? RE.V for renewable. It's traded on the TSX Venture Exchange. So that's the .V is the Venture Exchange.
Thanks for the question. I like that question. It was an easy one.
Amazing. We can have easy ones. We can also have tough ones. I think, we're not shy here. David does ask about a new tax credit for 30% on solar, which I'm not familiar with. Are you, Nani? What's that? ITC? Say it into the mic.
Investment tax credit. It's a federal tax credit for solar and other types of clean energy technologies that the federal government implemented in response to basically the Inflation Reduction Act in the US.
Okay, great. The question is, if you don't have the tax to take the credit against, that is going to make it a little challenging. I think you might be able to carry that forward a little bit, but I'm not an accountant on that. David, I'll try to get a better answer for you specifically about that one. Susan, yeah, you've got a question? So I'm saying the question is, I'm saying don't invest more than 3% or so. Is that because of risk? That's me wearing my certified financial planner hat, and it's more about diversification. So to me, diversification is an absolute core value when it comes to investing. And so having a nice, broad, diversified portfolio is the name of the game. We can certainly carve out more than that. Like if you want to go more than that, we absolutely can. I've got some clients that do have a pretty substantial part into impact investments, into renewable energy. But I always sort of look at it from that broad perspective. And so at least as a starting point, it's recognizing that individual companies do tend to be a little bit more volatile. They don't always track the overall market. So especially if you're just getting started, sort of that 1% to 3% is a great starting point. And then, we can have some conversations about sort of where you're at and whether we want to increase that. Please. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Sure. Perfect. So Susan's asking a great question, really wants us to talk about return and return expectations. And this is where, I will just preface it by saying there's a difference between historic returns, so what we've kind of done in the past, versus expected returns, which is what we can sort of expect to earn in the future. I'll kind of go down this way because I feel like Solar Share, because it is a bond, has, one of the easiest models when it comes to expected return. So what's the expected return on a Solar Share bond right now?
Yeah, so I can speak to just notwithstanding what you just said, what we have offered in the past is somewhere between 3.5% and 5%. So, 4.5%, something like that.
Sure. So in terms of when we invest into our clients, typically the range that we look for is roughly about 12 to 15%. So again, that's the return we expect when we invest into our clients. Yeah, so that's why we're able to support a 9% on our green bonds. Obviously, as a publicly traded company, if you buy our shares, it can go up, it can also go down. So there is, again, we don't know what that price will be tomorrow, much less down the road, and we can't give any guidance on that. But on the bond side, it's a fixed return, and I think all our bonds are about 5 years. So you invest it for 5 years, and we pay 9% every year.
Similarly, we don't, because of the public markets, we wouldn't have anything we could say on the public side. Typically, we're looking from anywhere from 9 to 20% returns on projects that we invest in. Again, it ranges because sometimes we do hold those projects on long term and we're not reselling them necessarily. But for us, in terms of the public markets, that's why we rely more on the dividend side of it, so that's kind of the constant assured feedback loop, versus because the market kind of has its own master. That's not us necessarily.
Amazing, fantastic. Martin, I did see your question there. I don't want you to feel like we skipped over it, but I think I did address it a little bit. The question was talking about the federal government redeveloping land, and you submitted a pre-budget brief, which is great. And understanding, the question is, what do panelists propose to galvanize the community energy co-op and other actors to take advantage of the opportunity? But I do think that, again, asking people who are building these projects to be sort of pushing the federal government, there's a lot of work to be done there. But I mean, that's, there are other projects. I think there are other ways of having that impact. So, I mean, unless anyone wants to talk about sort of government relations and trying to sort of push government, can you speak to that at all, Chris?
Yeah, I can speak to it a little bit. I think, I'd speak to it from a provincial government perspective or territorial, because energy policy is based on the territory or province in our country. And so one of the things that we're interested in at SolarShare is to do something called virtual net metering. And I think that would really, what virtual net metering would allow us to do is to sell power directly to our members. Right now, we can't sell our members power. We would love to do that. We would love to close that circle where, right now there's an investment opportunity. We sell our power to the government effectively. What we'd love to do is be able to sell that power to our members. And so our members become consumers of the electricity that we produce, and they can participate in the setting of the policies and the price around that electricity that we sell to them, and we can all collectively decide that. So that's something that we're working on as a policy direction moving forward to help expand more renewable energy cooperatives in Canada. Another group that's working on that is Community Energy Cooperatives Canada, an umbrella group for renewable energy cooperatives across the country, so we can get that kind of policy across our provinces and territories.
I would just probably add one model that's worked reasonably well in Canada, and I think there's a lot more that could be done, is really around the partnership. So where there's kind of a component of any bids or any new energy projects that ensures that there has to be ownership at the community level. This is done quite a lot within the Indigenous communities in Canada already. But that model just allows for, again, making sure that you're having potentially the larger firms come in who know how to develop this at price, who have the scale, who can bring the costs down, but ensuring that there is that say from the local communities, and also ensuring that then the revenue and benefits of that continue to stay in the community and can support kind of job creation, et cetera. So I think where the government can play a role is just ensuring that those partnerships are part of kind of providing any of those permits and allowing those projects to be built.
Awesome. I love it. I think there's a lot of really cool opportunity. I love the idea of, when I do buy a house and I want to put solar panels up there, that I could get the financing. I could partner with SolarShare to be able to do that, at a local level. That would be really cool. James does ask the SolarShare's ticker symbol. So SolarShare does not have a ticker symbol. It's not publicly traded. It's trickier. It's not impossible to hold inside of RSPs and TFSAs, but it is a little bit trickier. So, it's not as straightforward, but generally speaking, we can tell people to go to solarbonds.ca and fill out the information there to be able, if you've got interest. I believe it's only Ontario residents because it is a co-op. Do I have that right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's only residents of Ontario. Unfortunately, there are other renewable energy cooperatives across the country that you can check out. You take a look at the CECC website for that. Unfortunately, we don't offer bonds in registered accounts anymore, but some of our friends across the province and in other places do as well.
Yeah, and this has been a tricky thing. I mean, there's so much we could talk about in terms of trying to push governments to be able to make this thing easier for investors, for project developers. There's so many opportunities. To me, it's always about, okay, what are the options that are available now? And there are some amazing renewable energy cooperatives across the country. cecooperative.ca, I know is one great organization. And again, the more people are involved with this, the bigger we can grow the community, work that community together to be able to push for these changes. I will say maybe I'll say the last question just to keep, we are sort of at the hour, so I'll keep it as a very efficient panel, but we did get a really interesting question from Russell that I'd love to address, which is that understanding the global situation. We've talked about sort of the local aspect, but we are in a global world. It is very much the elephant in the room right now when it comes to solar, which is that China has decided that they want to own the solar market globally. As such, they are subsidizing the cost of production. One of the reasons prices have come down so much is our government support dried up. Remember when Doug Ford canceled all of our projects, 8 years ago or so, we were helping drive those costs down. Now it is largely China that is bringing those costs down. They're generating some of the highest quality and cheapest cost solar. How do you envision geopolitical policy impacting solar? Will we see countries put tariffs on China, like the EV market? Are there other countries meaningfully producing solar? Quality, quantity, price. I kind of love this in a framing, and instead of maybe talking just about China, but also just talking about the global renewable energy market right now, China is definitely dominating that market. What is that impact? Is there an opportunity for Canada? Jane, I see you nodding. Can I throw it to you first?
Sure. So I think I heard an interesting stat today, which was that this year will be the largest year on record for renewable development in the US, and that's coming with tariffs. So if you want to talk about where they're getting it from, they're not necessarily getting it from China. In fact, they're not. They're getting it maybe sometimes from Chinese companies, but they've also increased their domestic market for that as well. So certainly there's options around it. A lot of the Chinese companies, because of the UFLPA rules previously, so this is prior to the most recent.
Hold on, I don't know that acronym.
UFLPA. It's the kind of it's essentially the anti-human rights laws against China that were previously that made everyone need to look at the traceability of anything coming in. It was particularly targeted at the solar panel industry. It meant that most solar panels were actually just like sitting on ships out in harbors in the US for a while, until most of the Chinese manufacturer then moved manufacturing plants outside of China, and the Uyghurs, which I'm going to say the wrong, in the Xinjiang province of China, which was the allegations of forced labor within there. So this has been around for several years, and I would say because of that, we've seen the market develop. We've also seen the market develop massively in India, for instance, and Indian companies growing in the solar space. That's actually been really beneficial for the Indian market, because currently they're actually, because of tariffs, they're buying their own panels, and it's a huge growing area. The power needs there for the tech companies is huge. So I think, yes, China's helping to drive how we're doing it and when we're doing it, but I think it's also incentivizing other countries around the world to think about how they're doing it and how they can onshore some of that themselves. So we are seeing that globally.
Amazing. Bernard, you want to have a go?
Yeah, sure. So what we are seeing is that, similar to the cost of things like computers, cell phones coming down, we are seeing that with solar, we're seeing that with batteries. And a lot of that, yes, started with China, but we are seeing the proliferation of those manufacturing capacities go to places like India, Southeast Asia, places Mexico. And really, I think that's just a natural evolution with any technology. It tends to follow to the lowest cost. The role for Canada, I think from a manufacturing perspective, is challenging. Obviously, we have some manufacturing capacity, but it's not to the scale that the world needs. And really where Canada can really play a very active and dominant role is really in the financial system. We have one of the strongest financial systems in the world. But yet, when you look at the reports that Schiff and organizations sort of track, that is not being diverted to renewables. That's not to say don't support your existing fossil fuel clients, but more needs to be done on the financial side. And really, I think that's really the market that Canada needs to capitalize. When you look at the TSX as an example, the entire renewable and clean tech sector is 1%. It's primarily Brookfield. So congratulations, Jamie. But that is an example of the financial system really not carrying its weight. And there is a big role that I think Canada can really play, much like we did with the mining industry, with the, the oil and gas industry, that financial system can be unlocked to do more good. So.
Amazing. Yeah, Jane.
This isn't a financial point, but I do think sometimes we think about China and how they're accelerating this as possibly like negative for other countries. But if you think about it from a emissions perspective, China is like a third of the world's emissions. They also put more renewables in the ground in the last year than pretty much all the other countries combined. And if they want to be the head of the top of it, they will, but that just actually has a net benefit for the world from a energy perspective and a decarbonization perspective. So the flip side of them wanting to own something is we could all benefit from it as well, I think. So just wanted to put a shout out for that.
I mean, I've been hearing a lot about this notion, we've all heard the term like a petrostate in the past. Now I'm hearing a lot about understanding the electrostate, which are the countries that are going to be leading this electrification revolution, right? There's a huge geopolitical implications here. It drives me nuts that Canada had such a leadership position. Like it was 20 years ago, Stéphane Dion, talked about a green shift, right? It was, 10 years ago plus in Ontario, we had the Green Energy Act and some amazing leadership opportunities here. I feel like we've really squandered a lot of that, kind of saying, oh, but what about China? What about China? And now it's like China's eating our lunch on this. Whenever, I see some of this, that misinformation, I'm always just like, you've got your talking points from 2015 that you're going through. Like the world really has shifted. The world really has updated. I'm not, super confident that North American automakers are going to build EVs that I want to drive. And when I look at the EVs that are coming out of China and India and other countries, those are the ones that I would kind of prefer to own. So it's a really interesting dynamic. I think that, Bernard, I love your point about Canada playing to its strengths and that, it's probably not going to be manufacturing, but it certainly is financing. That's what we are so good at. And I think that really speaks to the conversation that we've had today. Chris, did you want to comment on that point at all, or am I good to wrap it up?
Just one comment. I think picking up on what Jane and Bernard said, I think this is an economic opportunity for Canada in terms of the electrification of the world. Like last year, I think Pakistan imported 20 gigawatts of panels. Just ridiculous. The world is moving in an electrification direction. We would be wise to jump on that.
Fantastic. Well, I'm going to wrap it there. This has been an incredible conversation. So grateful for everybody on the internet who's been participating. Thank you so much. Everyone who's, listening after the fact on YouTube and on the podcast, we love you so much. For those here in the live studio audience, thank you so much. Let's give everyone a big round of applause. Have a great night, everyone.